When I was 8 years old, my mum left. She just left. I thought she was going shopping, but she didn't come back. Eventually, I realized she was never coming back. I'm not sure when I made up my mind that when I was 16 years old, I was going to go to London and find her, but that is what I did. Mum left shortly after the Second World War. Our family at that time consisted of Mum, Dad, my 15-year-old brother Alan, myself, aged 8, my 5-year-old brother Paul, and my baby sister Kay, just 6 months old. Dad was hardly ever home because he worked on the London buses and was also in the Home Guard. We lived in Bexley Heath, and it was a bit of a commute. We had an Uncle Jock who came to visit sometimes. He was in the army and always brought treats for us kids. He and Dad were never there at the same time. On the day Mum left, she took Kay and Alan with her. She left Paul and I behind. Dad was not there. He came home late that day. Mum, Alan and Kay never came home again. As time went by, I became determined to go to London when I was 16 and find my mum. We were not in touch for 8 long years, so I knew this would be no easy task. I had no address, no contact with family or Mum's friends or anyone that knew where Mum was. Somehow, I just knew Mum was in London, and I prayed every day that I would find her. With a child's faith, never once did I think it wouldn't happen. The problem was how to make it happen. By the time I was 16, my father and I hardly ever saw each other. He was remarried, and I knew he wouldn't help. My younger brother Paul had been fostered, then adopted by a family in a different town from where I lived, and we had lost touch with each other. What could I do? I did have a friend called Auntie Chandler. We'd been friends with her when we lived in London, and she'd been very kind to me after Mum left. She invited me to spend holidays with her, and we wrote to each other regularly. She was middle-aged, a little chubby, with a kind face and a kinder heart. I had been living in Broadstairs since I was 15, working and living in the Davidson Baby Nursery, training to be a child care worker. This facility was run by the Church of England Children's Society. My auntie had offered to meet me in London and help me find Mum. I gratefully accepted her offer. The day finally came. We were going to start our search. I had remembered visiting Mum's brother and his family who lived close to us when we lived in London. I couldn't remember the address, but I remembered the street and the house where they lived. Auntie and I decided that if we could find the house, my uncle would surely know where Mum was. I was very excited and a little anxious. Auntie was calm and told me not to expect too much, as we may not find the street or the house, and then we would have no idea what to do next. Of course, I totally disregarded everything she said. How could I not be excited? I've been looking forward to and praying for this day for nearly 8 years. We boarded the big red double-decker bus to Peckham Rye, which is where I remembered my uncle and his family had lived. After getting off the bus, memories came flooding back. I knew the street as soon as I saw it. I walked down the street looking for my uncle's house. My heart was thudding and I kept praying, please God, let us find it. I saw the house I remembered and started to run towards it. My poor auntie asked me to slow down so that she could catch up. I waited for her, and together we knocked on the door. We waited and waited for what seemed forever for someone to answer our knock. At last, a young girl opened the door. She looked very much like me. She was my cousin, Ruth. We'd gone to Sunday school together as children, had played together often. We had been good friends. She knew me at once and invited us in. My Aunt Chris and Uncle Bill were home and were so very happy to see me. We hugged, kissed, laughed, cried. They made us tea, and we sat and caught up with some of the things that had happened in my life after Mum left. I explained why we had come and that we hoped they could tell us where Mum lived. My aunt and uncle had been very upset when they found out what Mum had done. They couldn't understand how she could abandon 2 children, and they cut off all contact with her. I was devastated to hear this. My heart dropped, as this had been my biggest hope of tracking Mum down. But they told us that Mum and Uncle Jock had obtained work as cook, housekeeper and chauffeur at a club in London. Uncle had the address where they lived and worked 6 years ago. This was better than nothing, and at least a lead to Mum's whereabouts. None of us remembered if Uncle Jock's surname was Melvin or Melville. Of course, I wanted to leave immediately to find this address. After further discussion, it was decided that we should go back to my Auntie Chandler's and start out early the next morning. Auntie didn't know exactly where the address was or how to get there, so needed to find this out before we started on our search the next day. I hardly slept, and the next morning I kept urging Auntie to hurry. Finally, we boarded another red bus and were on our way. After getting off the bus and finding the address we'd been given, we knocked on the door. Auntie said she would do the talking. A man answered the door. He listened to Auntie explain why we were there and shook his head and said he had lived there for almost 10 years and had never heard of my mother or Uncle Jock. Somehow I didn't believe this was true, so I told her Auntie I was going to knock on doors either side of this one. We did that, but no one remembered my mother. I was devastated. Auntie said that there was another street she knew that had a very similar name, and that we should go there to see if perhaps my uncle had made a mistake and not remembered the address correctly. Off we went on yet another bus and knocked on yet another door. This turned out to be the Hungarian embassy. Once again, Auntie told them my tale of woe. They were very kind and invited us in while they searched their records to see if possibly my mother or Uncle Jock had worked there. We told them the problem with the possible last name. They gave us tea and cookies and chatted with us while they searched for both a Melvin or a Melville who had been an employee. Eventually, the lady came back to tell us they could find no record of anyone with either name ever having worked there over the last 10 years. We thanked them and said goodbye. They wished me luck on my search. I told Auntie I felt strongly that the previous address had been the right one, and I was going back to ask further up and down the street. I couldn't just give up. Back we went, and I worked up my way, knocking on doors. I was getting desperate and started tapping passers-by on their shoulder to ask about Mum. Auntie said this was futile, we should leave, as she was getting tired. I begged her to let me ask just one more person, and prayed that this person would know Mum. A cleaning lady came out to scrub a doorstep, and I walked over and told her a little of my story. She said she didn't know Mum, but she knew that Mum and Uncle Jock had been very good friends with the people who own the little pub just down the street. I said, thank you, and ran. Fortunately, the pub door was open. It was between opening hours. A lady was cleaning the bar. I walked in and approached her. I said, hello, and she interrupted me and said, I know who you are. You're Sylvia. Your Mum talks about you all the time. Imagine my joy and excitement. This lady, whose name I no longer remember, offered to walk with us to where my mother now lived. She said that it was not far. Off we went, with my poor auntie trailing a little behind. On the way, the lady told us Mum had 2 more children, another girl, Maggie, and a boy called Ian. My heart was racing. I couldn't wait to meet them. The walk seemed to take forever. When we arrived at my mother's address, I was surprised that she could live there. It was a very poor neighbourhood. I knocked on yet another door. Mum was not home. Oh, no. The lady who lived in the downstairs flat answered the door and told us that Mum had gone to do laundry at the public baths. She told us how to get there. Once again, we were told it was not far. Mum's friend, who had taken us to this house, said goodbye, as she had to get back to her pub. Auntie wanted to go home and come back the next day, but I told her I had waited 8 years and just couldn't wait one more day. Even though Auntie was tired, she kindly came with me. After what seemed like another marathon walk, we arrived at the baths. Auntie made me wait outside, as she felt it might be too much of a shock for my mother if I went in and found her. I paced up and down while I waited. What would I say? What would I do when I finally saw Mum? Would she even be happy that I'd found her? Would she be glad to see me again? Would she love me? I had no idea. I'd never thought past the actual finding of her. After what seemed an eternity, Auntie came out of the door, followed by a woman I knew instantly was my mother. Mum looked very different from when I'd last seen her. Where was Mum's beautiful, long black hair? She seemed so much older than Mum could possibly be. I ran to Mum and threw my arms around her. Mum, I said, I found you. My dreams and prayers had been answered. I'd found Mum at last. But what had happened to my beautiful mother in the 8 long years we had been apart? What would happen now? Well, that's for another story.